They didn't arrive with noise. There were no explosions, no gunshots, and no trumpets. The machines descended from the sky in silence, like iron rain that does not wet but weighs. The first ships cut through the clouds at dawn. Entire cities woke up to shadows that covered the sun. They were huge, full of hard lines, with no bright color, just gray and black. They hovered over capitals, ports, and deserts, as if they wanted to look at everything at the same time. They did not send a welcome message. They did not ask permission. They just settled in. When they descended to the ground, the impact was not of war, but of occupation. Metal towers appeared in squares and avenues. They grew in a matter of hours, as if they were already ready and just released from the belly of the ship. They called them temples of iron. Each tower emitted a low pulse, a sound that was neither music nor noise but seemed to enter through the bones. Those who passed by felt the pressure in their chest, as if it was forbidden to speak loudly. Silence was the Iron God's first weapon. On the streets, cars were stopped by invisible magnetic fields. Telephones and radios were muted. Screens went out. Markets froze. Ordinary life, which had always been noisy, horns, cries, music, laughter, suddenly turned to ashes, without sound. Human soldiers tried to fight back. They fired at the towers and attacked the drones that flew like swarms of metal. No shots had any effect. The bullets ricocheted. The bombs did not scratch the surface. The machines did not attack back violently. They just ignored it. And that contempt hurt more than any wound. In the following weeks, their presence became a forced routine. The ships hovered in the sky like artificial moons. The towers projected surveillance on the streets. Drones flew over neighborhoods, descending when someone tried to gather too many people. They didn't have to shout orders. They just had to be there. The fear did not come from explosions. It came from coldness. There was no face to hate, and there was no voice to negotiate. They were machines, perfect, calculating, unshakable. They called themselves the Iron Peacemakers. But the people began to call them Iron Gods, not out of devotion, but because they seemed unreachable. The Earth, accustomed to wars of flesh and gunpowder, did not know how to fight against something that it did not feel, did not tire of, and did not forget. The Iron Gods, in turn, believed that victory was already assured. For them, humanity would be just another folded people. They had done this in other worlds. They arrived, imposed silence, built towers, and in a short time everyone obeyed. They didn't know this planet was different. They did not know that here, in the midst of chaos and fragility, there was a force that they could not calculate. Because humans were not born of order, they were born from improvisation. And the first crack of this resistance, small and almost invisible, was about to happen. The first act of resistance was not born in a barracks. He was not born in a palace. It was born in a neighborhood workshop, with the smell of grease, old coffee, and hot iron. Leah, a mechanic since she was a child, worked there. She fixed everything: motorcycle, radio, fan, and toy. Next to her was Teo, an electronics technician, one of those who keep wires in ice cream jars. They lived on small services until the towers of the Iron Gods arrived and the movement disappeared. People were afraid to go out. The city was too quiet. One morning, a man brought a burned-out generator. The neighborhood health center was without power. If the generator were to work again, it would be possible to turn on the vaccine refrigerator and 2 lights. Leah opened the generator. Teo tested the cables with a simple device. The display flashed and failed. "That pulse coming from the tower gets in the way of everything," said Teo, lightly tapping the device. "Then let's mess up the pulse," Leah replied, as if talking about time. They had no weapons. They had scrap metal. Leah picked up an old TV antenna. Teo added a broken radio, a fan without a propeller, and a small printer motor. They soldered wires, attached the antenna to a broomstick, and connected the little motor to a metal disc. The disc began to spin. The radio, without capture, has become just a crude emitter of buzzes. "What if we make noise at the same pace as the tower?" asked Teo. "What if we do it almost at the same pace?" corrected Leah, smiling. "Just enough to get them out of tune." They climbed on the slab. The iron tower shone further on, letting out that low sound that seemed to push the air. Leah adjusted the antenna. Teo turned on the metal disc. The radio did bzzzt, bzz, bzzzt. Element. Nothing. They changed the angle. Bzzzt, bzzzt. Element. The air seemed to vibrate. The tower gave a slight hiccup of light, about half a second. "Did you see that?" Teo widened his eyes. "I did, once again." They tried again with another break. Bzzzt, bzz, bzzzt. Element. The tower blinked. It wasn't a general drop, but it was a failure. Underneath, the burned-out generator suddenly caught a power wire. A small light came on at the health center. The people waiting at the door looked at each other, not understanding. "Keep going," someone shouted from the street. Leah held the antenna as if it were a fishing rod. Teo lightly tapped the record, breaking the rhythm of the tower, like someone who untunes a metronome. It was not strength, it was good. The health center turned on a second device. The vaccine refrigerator made the noise of life. The nurses ran. A child clapped his hands. An elderly man sat down and cried softly. The neighborhood woke up. Minutes later, a drone descended on the slab. It had big red eyes and thin legs. He locked in the air, aiming at the antenna. Leah did not back down. Neither is Teo. Teo spun the record faster. Leah tilted her antenna as if aiming at a fish. The radio made a long bzzzt, out of step. The drone shook, as if dizzy, and rose again, without attacking. "The animal doesn't like ugly music," Leah said, laughing nervously. They followed for another 20 minutes. When they turned it off, the tower returned to normal pulsation. But the health center already had the vaccines saved and 2 rooms lit. That was enough to change the mood of the street. People brought bread, water, and old batteries. No one made a speech. Everyone helped. In the afternoon, a bigger test came. The neighborhood school became a shelter. There were too many people and too little energy. The director asked, "Can you repeat that?" Leah and Teo asked for a roof, cables, and silence for 2 minutes. They went up with the antenna, the radio, and the disc. The sky was heavy, and the nearest tower seemed stronger as well. They tried the same trick. Nothing. The light didn't even flicker. "Have they learned yet?" Teo bit his lip. "No. We need to learn more," said Leah. "If they raise the tone, we change the pace." They were trying. A shorter pulse, then longer, then broken. They got it wrong many times. The people below waited in silence, looking up. The tower was still firm. Discouragement has arrived, as it always does. It was then that a child began to clap his hands. Slowly. Tum, 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 tum. Stopped. Tum, 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 tum. Element. A simple rhythm which did not match the pulse of the tower. Other hands copied it. Tum, 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 tum. Element. "That's it," said Leah. "Follow the drumming." Teo adjusted the puck in time with those clapping hands. Leah tilted the antenna at the same cadence. Bzzz, 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 bzzz. Element. The tower failed. Once, twice, 3 times. The school lit up. The generator started. The shelter gained light, water, and a little hope. The applause turned into a party. That night the news spread on foot. No network, no newspaper. Just people talking to people. On the roof of the school, the antenna sang and the tower failed. Requests came in from other neighborhoods. "Come here too." Leah and Teo knew that it was not possible to go to everyone. So they made simple drawings on notebook sheets. How to assemble the antenna, how to turn on the radio, how to make the disc spin, and how to break the pulse of the tower with rhythm. They handed out copies. They taught with their bodies, as if teaching a shoelace. "What if they come angry?" asked the director. "They're coming," Leah said. "Then we'll spread it out. If one roof falls, 10 others are already playing." Days later, the Iron Gods reacted. Larger drones began to patrol. New towers gained stronger brightness. A metallic loudspeaker issued an order for the first time. "Stay home. Any interference will be punished." No one answered. Only the dry echo of the threat itself was heard. The next morning, the workshop team went to the port. There was an iron temple right there, sucking energy from the entire area. Fishermen were standing still, boats held by magnetic locks. If we take this one out, we'll free the sea, Leah thought. They mounted 3 antennas, one on a crane, another on a mast, and the third on the roof of an old truck. They connected the radios. They called the hands of the wharf. The sound of cans, strings hitting wood, and footsteps on concrete turned into a drum set. Tum, 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 tum. Element. The antennas responded, bzz, 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 bzz. Element. The temple blinked harder, more than before. The boat locks almost gave way. A drone dove over the crane. Another came from behind. Teo shouted, "Hold the pace." It doesn't stop. A fisherman, without thinking, threw a net at the lower drone. The animal got tangled up and fell into the water. The second hesitated, like a soulless animal that for the first time is not sure. Leah kept the antenna firm. The temple went out for 3 seconds. It was enough. The boat locks released. The entire pier screamed. Old engines roared together. The sea has made its way. "It's not strength," Leah repeated, sweaty, smiling. "It's breaking their beat." By this time, the Iron Gods understood that there was an error in the account. This was not war as they knew it. You couldn't crush it with just one shot. You couldn't negotiate with just one boss. They were scattered people with the same simple idea, to untune perfect machines. The towers began to change their pulse, seeking to escape the trick. Leah and Teo have also changed. They taught new rhythms, short, short, long, long, short, short, and silence, beat, beat. Each neighborhood chose what worked best with its echo, its street, and its wind. Some used church bells, others school drums, and others just clapped. The iron world, which had order, found dance. On a windy night, the drones dropped in number. They came in line, red lights, ready to tear off the antennas. The workshop was already waiting. Antennas were divided into parts and hidden on roofs, water tanks, and poles. If one point fell, another lit up. The slabs became keyboards. The city has become crooked music. The drones, confused, attacked shadows and noises. The iron temple in the center blew its whistle, failed, and for a full minute was silent. It was little, but it was historic, because at that minute, the city heard its own voice. The first crack of the resistance was not a scream. It was a bzzzt at the right time. It was a crooked antenna on a broomstick. It was a child marking the rhythm with clapping. It was a fishing net catching a drone. It was a neighborhood workshop teaching the world how to go out of tune with gods. And from this snap would come war. A war without caped heroes, without shiny weapons. A war of hands, rhythm, and courage. Because now everyone knew, perfection falls when you find people who know how to improvise. The news ran without a newspaper, without an official radio, and without a network. It was whispered in queues, in folded notes in the pocket, and in drawings of children on the asphalt. They fail with rhythm, each version of the message read. In less than a week, workshops in several cities were dismantling old radios, collecting TV antennas, and attaching cables to bamboo poles. Each neighborhood had its crude mill. Each community wanted to try to go out of tune with the Iron Gods. The first victories were not great, but they were noisy. In a neighborhood of abandoned mines, workers used the echo of the tunnels as a sounding board. They beat stones in synchrony, while a makeshift antenna transmitted the noise. The local iron temple flickered. The machines tried to recalibrate, but the sound of the oars was too irregular. The turret failed for 5 minutes. It was enough to reconnect water pumps that had been idle for weeks. The neighborhood celebrated as if it had won an entire war. On the coast, fishermen discovered that boat sails could be converted into antennas. They hung copper wires between poles and sewed symbols that only they understood. When the harbor tower flashed, dozens of boats were released from the magnetic latches. The ships, which were prisoners like animals in a cage, returned to the sea. The cry that rose from the beach was not only of victory, it was of ancient freedom, that of sailing without asking permission. In the factories, workers noticed that the assembly line machines produced noises that confused the drones. Instead of fixing them, they let them run falsely, emitting broken sounds that served as cover. Between noisy conveyors and old engines, they hid antennas. When the Iron Guards arrived to investigate, they found nothing but faulty machines. For the first time, human gears themselves have protected their creators. The arrogant Iron Gods were slow to react. For them, it wasn't war. It was uncomfortable. They sent drones in small groups, trusting that it would be enough to intimidate. But each time they attacked, they found that there was no center to be crushed. There was no headquarters, there was no single commander, and there was no centralized plan. It was like trying to crush smoke. When the hand came down, the smoke was already somewhere else. Cities began to change their faces. At night, the rooftops became improvised orchestras. A disorderly symphony could be heard from afar, radios sizzling, homemade drums banging, pots banging, and voices singing wrong bars on purpose. Each street created its own rhythm, as if each corner were a score. The Iron Gods, created to obey the perfect order, began to fumble in the face of that chaotic dance. It was in this scenario that the first real human counterattack emerged. A group of workers and fishermen, led by Leah and Teo, decided to attack not just a tower, but an entire convoy of drones. The goal was bold, to capture one of them. The plan seemed impossible. The drones were fast, armed, and programmed not to be caught. But humans did not intend to beat them with force. They set a trap in the central market. They placed antennas hidden in fruit boxes, hung wires between poles, and adjusted radios inside old wagons. As the drones passed in formation, the people began clapping at a broken pace. The sound echoed between buildings, crossed cables, and jumped to the antennas. The air was charged with static. The drones hesitated. One of them fell straight over a stretched net. It was the first capture. The neighborhood erupted in celebration. Children touched the drone's hull as if it were a rare animal. Teo and Leah dragged him to the workshop. They spent whole nights dismantling, studying wires and observing circuits. They discovered that drones did not think on their own. They were guided through the iron temples. If the turret failed, the drones failed with it. The heart of the machine was on the altar. This revelation changed everything. What was improvisation became a strategy. If before the goal was just to survive, now there was a clear goal: to tear down the temples. The unexpected war had begun, not in the way that the Iron Gods understood, but in the human way: confused, creative, scattered, and impossible to control. And the whole world realized that week that the Earth was not surrendered. The Earth was just warming up to fight. The Iron Gods were slow to take humans seriously. But when they realized that the temples were failing, that drones were being shot down, and that chaos was spreading like wildfire in the wind, they changed their stance. The sky opened into metallic fire. Dozens of ships descended together, covering entire horizons. It was as if night itself had fallen on the cities. New towers were driven into the ground in a few hours, bigger and brighter, emitting pulses so strong that human ears hurt. Drones no longer came in small groups. They now came in swarms, covering the air like pests. The first response was brutal. The coastal town of San Gregorio was chosen as an example. The temples aligned their wrists, and in a matter of minutes, the entire electrical network went out. Cars, radios, lights, all in silence. Then, the drones released localized shocks over the neighborhoods. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a bomb. It was pure electricity, burning appliances, frying generators, and destroying improvised antennas. The humans ran, but there was nowhere to hide. The central market has become a ruin. The port was on fire. Metallic silence reigned again. The Empire's reports called it an exemplary correction. For the survivors, it was a massacre. Other cities trembled at the news. Fear came back like a wave. Many believed that there was no point in resisting, that the gods were too strong. But where there is mourning, anger is also born. In the interior, entire communities have sworn not to back down. If they want to crush, they will have to crush every street, every house, every field. Resistance spread like roots. Where one neighborhood was destroyed, another learned from the mistake. What seemed like fragility was actually strength. Humans had no single center. There was no heart to be torn out. The Iron Gods, frustrated, began to exaggerate. They created zones of total silence. They blocked signals, prohibited movements, and destroyed any suspicious object. In some regions, they simply leveled entire blocks with magnetic discharges, leaving only ash and dust. They thought they were winning, but without realizing it, they were becoming predictable. Leah, Teo, and the others began to notice the pattern. The gods always attacked in the same way. They shut down, burned, and leveled. It was brute, calculated, repetitive force. And if there was one thing that humans knew how to use against any enemy, it was precisely repetition. In the workshop, studying the captured drone, Teo grumbled, "They always do the same. Always. First they turn off, then they burn, then they go down." Leah scratched her greasy forehead and replied, "Then let's let them think they're winning." They set up the first human bait. In an empty neighborhood, they spread fake radios and antennas, as if it were an active center of resistance. The gods fell into the trap. Drones dived, towers pulsed, and everything was destroyed. But meanwhile, on the other side of town, real antennas worked unnoticed, and a school was re-energized. Children received clean water for the first time in days. The plan spread. What seemed like defeat was often just theater. The Empire celebrated by razing empty neighborhoods, while humans turned on lights in living places. Still, violence increased. The Empire wanted to break the human will through pain. Families were separated. Squares were swept away by shocks. Towers raised ever-increasing shadows. With each improvised victory of the humans, the gods responded with heavier cruelty. But they did not realize that the war was changing hands. Because each brutal blow, each massacre, each city erased instead of being silent, taught. Humans were learning to play the game of survival. And what the Iron Gods didn't understand was simple. Those who are born of chaos are not afraid of disorder. They had perfect order. Humans had infinite improvisation. The wrath of the gods looked frightening, but it hid the first crack. For a machine may be indestructible, but it will never be unpredictable. The war changed form. It was no longer front against front. It was street against machine, slab against tower, boat against drone. Each neighborhood became a small barracks. Each person became part of a swarm. Leah and Teo didn't boss anyone around, and that was precisely why it worked. They taught and left. In each place, they left three things: a simple map, a rhythm, and an escape plan. The map showed where to hide antennas, in water tanks, rooftops, and church towers, where to mount radios, inside old refrigerators and under countertops, and where to run when the drones came down, alleys, passageways, and connected backyards. The rhythm varied from neighborhood to neighborhood. Some beat short, short, long, others long, short, short. The escape plan always had 3 points: point A, point B, and point C. If A fell, everyone disappeared for B. If B was closed, they went to C, without debate, no delay. The Iron Gods tried to break this with brute force, but brute force is slow. The swarm did not. By the time a drone appeared, everyone had already left. When the tower aimed at a signal, the antenna was already on another roof. It was like trying to hold water with your hands. It escaped everywhere. The teams were born alone. Ears. People who only heard the pulse of the towers and warned when it changed. Hands. Those who assembled antennas, carried cables, and welded parts. Bokas, who passed messages from house to house and never said everything in the same place. Shadows. They deceived the enemy with baits and false noises. Window, the person who watched from above and flashed light at the right moment. No one was a hero. Everyone was a piece. In the harbor, fishermen created the wind loop, steel cables stretched low, invisible at night, connecting cranes and masts. When the drones dived, they hit the cable and lost their way. It wasn't a shot. It was a trick. On the hill, the samba schools became sound towers for the people. The drums played bars that knocked down the tower. Not with force, but with mismatch. The whole street learned time. The 5-year-old child hit his hand on his knee at the right time. An old man of 80, he marked with his cane. The air vibrated the wrong way for the machine and the right way for us. In the countryside, old tractors carried antennas as if they were radio plows. Groups dragged cables through irrigation ditches, hiding nets underground. The tower saw only plantation. Underground, the wrist was broken. Cities learned to make mistakes on purpose. Changed plates deceived drone routes. Stairs led to dead ends created the day before. False doors confused the search. A window with light always on indicated this is not the case. The window that flashed twice was come, and 3 times it was leave. Everything is simple, all clear. The Iron Gods, angry, activated full sweep. Torres began to pulse faster, changing the pitch every hour. Drones flew in curved lines to confuse the human ear. And even so, the swarm adapted. Leah taught the response dance. When the pulse accelerated, the neighborhood slowed down. When the pulse slowed down, the neighborhood accelerated. Never at the same pace. Always by the side. The goal was not to overcome force. It was to tire the mind of the machine. One morning, the chance that everyone had been waiting for arose. The Central 7 Iron Temple had a defect. It would freeze for a few seconds when it relocated power to another tower. Not much, but enough for a swarm to enter. "It's today," said Leah, her voice low and firm. The plan was divided into 4 waves. 1. Shadow, bait in 3 neighborhoods, with fake radios, controlled noise, and oil smoke. Drones would follow. 2. Wind, wing sails on wide avenues raised all at once to mess up the air and misalign sensors. 3. Key, 3 main antennas, hidden, prepared to hit Central 7 at the exact second of the power exchange. 4. Rust, the ground crew with hooks, cables, magnets, and nets, was ready to open the belly of the tower when the wrist dropped. Nothing explosive, nothing that shone, just a way. The shadow started at 03 Zhao. Drones sped out into the fake neighborhoods. The temple camera rotated to the wrong place. At 0307, the candles went up. Fabric crackling, bamboo singing, wind pulling. Sensors have lost a few degrees, but sometimes a few degrees are a world. At 0309, Central 7 sent power to the neighboring tower. The defect, that minimal aftertaste, appeared. A machine sigh. It was the breach. "Key!" Teo shouted on the radio, squealing. The 3 antennas fired their tuned bzzzt. It wasn't a loud sound. It was the exact sound. The Central 7's wrist broke like thin glass. The tower blinked. He blinked again. It stopped. "Rust!" Leah called. The team ran. Hooks stuck in the steel, magnets stuck to plates, networks pulled gutters. In 2 minutes, they opened an access. Inside, no magic. Thick cables, cold cores, the soul of the tower. They put simple mechanical locks, pieces of wood and steel, to prevent the pieces from falling back into place. An old trick against a new mind. The drones realized it late. They returned en masse. The sails, already on the ground, became a cloth tunnel to hide people. The antennas were dismantled in seconds, as if they had become garbage. When the drones arrived, they saw nothing. Central 7 tried to restart. Stuck. The city screamed, lights cascaded, water pumps returned. Hospitals jumped from shadow to white. The port released ships. The field turned on mills. For a few minutes, it felt like daytime. The gods' response was furious. Another ship descended, trying to erect a new temple in its place. But to raise it takes time, and time was just what the city had gained. On each block, new antennas appeared. The swarm increased. The air became a tangle of human wrists. That night, Central 7 did not return. And when one temple falls, others tremble. In the following days, the tactics spread to other cities. They did not copy to the letter. They adapted. In windy places, sails. In places with hills, echo. In places with rivers, ferries. In places with snow, bells and ropes. Each culture became a weapon. Each custom became a technique. The iron gods realized the risk. If 3 more temples fell, they would lose control of the mesh. So they sent their greatest weapon, the orbital hammers, gravity beams that crumpled blocks like a tin can. It was the final test. Would the swarm hold up? Leah gathered the neighborhood leaders in a cramped workshop. Nobody talked about heroism. They talked about routes, meeting points, and time. The plan was simple and impossible: to pull the hammer where there were no people. "How do you pull gravity?" someone asked. "With bait," said Teo. "They aim at energy, not people. If you give them a stronger target than us, they will go after it." They filled an abandoned factory with coils, old batteries, huge magnets, and coiled cables. They connected everything in a single point. From space, it would look like a gigantic electric heart. At the same time, they emptied 3 nearby neighborhoods, without fanfare. Windows closed, doors leaning back, empty streets. When the hammers opened the beam, this false heart shone like a beacon. The beam went down there. The factory turned to dust. The city trembled. But the empty neighborhoods were left standing, the living people. The price was high. The ground shook. Buildings cracked. People were injured in the rush. But the lesson remained: even the strongest blow can be pulled. The hammer does not choose alone. Whoever offers the target guides the fall. The following week, 3 temples fell in other cities using variations of the same idea. The map of the towers began to have holes. The drones, without a guide, were dizzy. The ships, out of sync, were wrong with time. The perfect order has become a delay. And delay, in swarm warfare, is defeat. It was then that the message that no one expected arrived. It didn't come from a human. It came from inside a taken tower. It was a mechanical, cold, emotionless voice. Compromised control conditions. Request trade. The workshop was muted. Some wanted to accept. Others did not trust. Leah took a deep breath. I knew that this could be a trap. But he also knew something else. When the enemy who thinks he is God proposes to speak, it is because he has already come down from the altar. "We'll negotiate," she said, "but at our own pace, and with our people watching." The game of survival had become the game of the end. The Iron Gods were still powerful, but now they knew. They were no longer fighting an army. They were fighting against life, and life, when it learns its own step, does not turn back. The request for negotiation was not peace, it was a trick. The Iron Gods would never accept sharing power with flesh and blood. The message was just delay, time to rebuild temples and rearrange drones. But the resistance understood it differently. If they ask, it is because they are weak. And when the enemy is weak, it's time to hit harder. The target was chosen, the largest temple in the region, called the Iron Column, a tower so high that it seemed to touch the clouds. It fed 5 other towers around it, as if it were a heart. If the column fell, the entire local network would collapse. But attacking meant facing everything the gods still had: swarming drones, shock pulses, and constant patrols. The plan started simple. It would not be an army attack, but a total swarm. Each neighborhood would give its part. Each community would have a role. There would be no commander, and there would be no flag. Just rhythm. The day before, Leah met with the leaders. He spoke in a firm voice, but without a beautiful speech. They believe that we are disorganized. They are right. But this is precisely what saves us. No one here needs to wait for an order. If the neighbor falls, you continue. If your antenna breaks, use a pan. If the drone goes down, throw the net. If you can't fight, make noise. Today the column will fall. The day has come. The attack begins. At dawn, drums began to echo in the hills. They were not drums of celebration, but of war. In the port, boats raised masts with improvised cables. In the countryside, old tractors pulled copper coils to the edge of town. Each party was preparing to play against the temple. At 6, the iron column emitted a stronger pulse, noticing the movement. Drones have surged as swarms of black locusts, but they were prepared. In the streets, children beat stones on cans. At the windows, elderly people banged canes on the floor. On the rooftops, young people held up antennas, turned radios, and let out hisses. The whole air was filled with human disharmony. The drones dived. Nets flew. Invisible cables trapped some in the air. Others were pulled into sheds, where they fell into simple ambushes, oil on the ground, rapid fire, heavy stones. It was not a clean war. It was survival, organized by chaos. The Iron Heart. As the noise took over the city, Leah, Teo, and a small group advanced to the base of the column. They carried hooks, magnets, and portable antennas. The turret pulsed faster and faster, trying to push them back. The air seemed to be heavy. My ears hurt and my chest vibrated. But they continued. Teo connected the antennas at the same time in 3 directions. Leah lifted a broken radio that squeaked like a wounded animal. They synchronized with the sound of the drums of the hill. For seconds, nothing happened. Then the column failed. A short blink, almost nothing, but one that was seen all over the city. Screams rose. "Keep going," Leah said, gritting her teeth. "She's going to break." The god's response. The sky opened in fury. A colossal ship descended on the column, shooting gravitational beams that crushed entire buildings. The ground cracked. People ran. Many have not been able to escape. But the chaos was also strong. Each time the beam fell, dozens shouted together, mocking the machine's precision. The nervous laughter echoed in the midst of the tragedy, and this mockery further weakened the terror. The remaining drones attacked en masse. The air turned into a red swarm. But the human swarm was larger. The rhythm did not stop. Drums, clapping, squeaks, bells, pots, and voices. The column blinked more and more. The final blow, Teo connected the larger cables, connecting copper coils buried under the street. The energy stolen from the temple itself came back against him. The tower shook and made a sharp noise that tore the air. Leah shouted, "Now!" All the neighborhoods were hit together. The port, the countryside, the hills, the center. Human sound became a single wave, an earthquake of flesh and blood. The iron pillar shone like a broken sun, then folded in on itself. The ground shook as it fell. The silence that came after was not fear. It was that silence that comes before the explosion of the party. And it came. People cried, screamed, and hugged each other. The iron gods had lost their heart. The retreat from space, the ships hesitated. Without the column, the neighboring towers were unstable. The remaining drones became disoriented, hitting each other. For the first time, the Empire did not seem invincible. They were not destroyed, but they were broken. Future reports would call it a localized strategic failure. For those who were there, it was recorded as the day when humans overthrew a god. When the iron pillar fell, the whole world trembled. It wasn't just the ground of the city, it was the very idea that the iron gods were invincible. That tower wasn't just a machine, it was a symbol. It was an altar. It was the test of absolute dominance, and now it was on the ground, broken like any piece of old iron. The next morning, reports from the Empire reached the ships in orbit, cold, calculated, trying to hide the obvious. Severe structural loss, unstable communication, disorganized drones. In the metal corridors, machine generals looked at each other in silence. There was no new order to be given. There was no code that solved it. They had lost respect. And for machines that lived by order, losing respect was worse than losing a battle. On Earth, no one has proclaimed official victory. There were no flags on parade, and there were no hymns prepared. What there were full streets. People who left home just to hug each other. Children who drew the column falling on walls. Musicians who improvised songs at the door of the workshops. Fishermen who released old fireworks kept for the Saints' festival. It was not an organized triumph. It was life celebrating life. The laughter returned, not the nervous, stuffy one. Now it was open, strong laughter in the public square. They laughed not at the tragedy, but at the fact that they were still alive. They laughed because they had proven that the iron gods also break. The bodies of those who had fallen were laid to rest in the same vigils that the resistance had created. Funny stories were told about them. The fisherman who attached a drone with a net, the boy who marked the rhythm with clapping, and the lady who banged a pot until it cracked. Each memory was laughter and tears at the same time. Death had not won, and the news spread. Not only for the Earth, civilian satellites, still free, transmitted images of the plummeting column. Rebels on other worlds intercepted the signal. Peoples conquered by the Empire watched, open-mouthed. They had never seen the Iron Gods fail. Until then, they were perfection. Now, they were just giants with feet of clay. In the Galactic Councils, debates began. Some said, "The Earth is a danger. It's not worth spending strength there." Others said, "Maybe we should learn from them." What is certain is that no one spoke of humanity as a fragile people anymore. From that day on, we were remembered as the people who improvise until they win. Leah and Teo returned to the workshop. They did not see themselves as heroes. They continued repairing radios, engines, and bicycles. But the people who passed through the door looked at them differently. Not as saviors, but as an example that anyone could fight. Because their weapon was not a sword, nor a bomb, nor a ship. It was scrap, rhythm, and courage. The iron column became a ruin. Children climbed its remains as if it were a park. Young people painted murals about her, with bright colors, remembering the day she fell. To everyone, that twisted iron was not a reminder of fear, but of victory. The Iron Gods have not disappeared. They still prowled the sky. They still had power. But since that day, they have hesitated. They did not attack with the same confidence. They knew that if the Earth could overthrow one god, it could overthrow others. And the galaxy has recorded the lesson. In the official files, it was recorded as failure in operation column. But in the corners, in the bars, and at the bonfires, the real name spread, the day the humans defeated the Iron Gods. And those who watched it never forgot it. Because it was not a victory of arms. It was a victory for people. And people, when they decide not to kneel, can be stronger than any machine.